Gina Ferolo was last seen on November 23, 2021, at the Buc-ee's gas station located off LPGA Boulevard and Interstate 95 in Daytona Beach, Florida. Her fiancé, who reported her missing, said he saw her at approximately 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, walking their dog, a brown and white female pit bull named Kia, in a field to the left of the gas station. According to him, after he went inside the gas station, he came out to find that both Gina and the dog were gone. At the time of her disappearance, Gina and her fiancé were living in their red Toyota pickup truck, which was parked in the lot of the gas station. The truck was locked, and Gina had the keys to it. Her fiancé waited for her to return for 3 or 4 hours. But when she didn't, he decided to have the truck towed and reported her missing. The dog, Kia, was later found safe, but there was no sign of Gina, and she has never been heard from again. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain unclear, and despite efforts to locate her, no new leads have emerged in the case. Janine Irwin was last seen by her family on the evening of March 12, 2006, when she went to bed at her home in Melbourne, Florida. The following day, she did not make any contact with her loved ones, which was unusual for her. Then, 2 days later, on March 14th at around 12:30 a.m., Janine called her husband, who she had been married to for only 4 months. She was possibly calling from a payphone, and during the call, she told him that she was at a gas station along US 1 near Grant, Florida, a location about 20 miles away from her home. Janine, sounding alarmed and frightened, asked her husband to have her mother, who lived with the couple, come to pick her up. Her voice was described as being distraught, and she appeared to be in some sort of distress. After the conversation abruptly ended, Janine's mother immediately went out in search of her daughter. She began driving up and down US 1, stopping at gas stations and asking anyone she encountered if they had seen Janine. For hours, she scoured the area, from one gas station to the next, but despite her extensive search, she could not locate her daughter. She continued searching until 4 a.m., but Janine was nowhere to be found. Her mother, exhausted and still unsure of her daughter's whereabouts, returned home, but there was still no sign of Janine. By this point, Janine had not been heard from for hours, and no further communication had come through. Given the alarming nature of the call and the fact that Janine was now missing for an extended period, her husband reported her as a missing person to the authorities on March 19, 2006, 5 days after she was last heard from. Initially, there was some speculation that Janine may have left voluntarily, though her sudden disappearance and the panic in her voice made this theory seem less likely. There were several unconfirmed sightings of Janine in the area following her disappearance, but none of these were substantiated by authorities. Janine had previously traveled around Florida and was familiar with several cities, including Fellsmere, Vero, Grant, and Cocoa. She was also known to frequent the Route 192 and Interstate 95 areas in western Melbourne. However, her family insisted that it was completely out of character for Janine to not stay in contact with them, especially considering she had 4 children who were deeply affected by her disappearance. She was a devoted mother, and the thought of her abandoning her family was simply unimaginable to those who knew her best. The fact that she left without a trace, without taking anything important or leaving behind any clues, only deepened the mystery. Kyle Epler was last seen by his mother at approximately 2 p.m. on July 29, 1999, in their hometown of Naples, Florida. Earlier that day, he had stopped by her workplace to visit and borrow $20 for gas. He told her that he planned to visit his girlfriend and then go to his 4:30 p.m. shift at the Grouper House, where he worked as a waiter. He also promised her he would drop off some dry cleaning before going to work. However, Kyle never made it to his girlfriend's house. He didn't complete the errand for his mother, and he has never been heard from again. The only clue left behind was a note he had written and left on the kitchen counter, which read, "Gone to find my river and myself." His mother reported him missing the following day. Authorities would later discover that Epler's silver 1988 Toyota Camry had been abandoned in the visitors' parking area at the Coastal Prairie Trail in Flamingo, Florida, located about 3 hours away from his home. This area is part of the Everglades National Park, a vast, wet, boggy, and dangerous region. A park receipt found inside the car was dated July 28th, one day before Kyle's disappearance. In the vehicle, authorities found camping gear, a bag full of clothes, a framed backpack, peanut butter, crackers, and some journals. His shirt was located 3 miles down the trail from where the car had been parked. Additionally, Epler's mother later confirmed that at least one pair of his hiking boots, as well as a navy blue hat with a white star on it that he often wore, were missing from their home. Kyle had graduated from Flahive High School in 1997 and was attending Santa Fe College, where he was studying zoology at the time of his disappearance. He had a strong passion for animals, and his love for them was evident in the way he cared for his own pets: 5 pet lizards, 7 turtles, a parrot, and 2 dogs. He had volunteered for the Humane Society and Animal Control and worked at several snake farms. In 1997 alone, he had traveled to places like Texas, North Carolina, and New Orleans. He also enjoyed outdoor pursuits such as hiking and exploring. Despite his mother's efforts to find him and numerous investigations, his case remains unsolved to this day. Richard Estrada was last seen at 11:30 a.m. on May 5, 2000, as he left the Hibiscus Golf Club in Naples, Florida, where he worked as a pin hooker. He did not show up for work the next day, nor did he come to collect his paycheck, which was highly out of character for him. Estrada's vehicle, a blue two-door 1990 Oldsmobile Toronado with Florida license plates number D70AZ, was also missing, adding to the mystery of his sudden disappearance. Those who knew him well said that Estrada would not have loaned his car to anyone, as he was known to be a reliable and responsible person. Estrada was very close to his family, visiting them every weekend, and he was considered a stable and trustworthy employee with no known issues involving drugs, alcohol, or gambling. At the time of his disappearance, he lived in the 5500 block of Laurel Ridge Street. 3 days after Richard went missing, his house tragically burned down, but it remains unclear whether the fire had any connection to his disappearance. Despite the strange circumstances, Estrada was not reported missing until June 29th, nearly 2 months after he was last seen, due to a miscommunication among his relatives. Estrada was unmarried and had a grown son who lived in Texas. Authorities have since labeled his disappearance as suspicious and do not believe he left voluntarily, given his stable life and the odd events surrounding his vanishing. To this day, his case remains unsolved, and there are no definitive answers regarding his whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Teresa Finn was last seen leaving her apartment in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on August 1, 1975, after having an argument with her boyfriend at their residence on Davie Boulevard. Following the disagreement, she told him she was going out to her car to calm down, but she never returned. Teresa drove away from the property that day, and she has never been seen again. She left all of her personal belongings behind at home, including $300 on her dresser, and has not accessed her bank accounts since her disappearance. According to her family, while it was not uncommon for Teresa and her boyfriend to have arguments, it was completely out of character for her to leave without any communication or warning. Her boyfriend reported her as missing, and he told investigators that she had been pregnant at the time of her disappearance. However, Teresa's family members were unaware of any pregnancy, and her mother has stated that she would have been informed had this been the case. While the family did learn that Teresa smoked marijuana, they did not believe she was deeply involved with drugs. 10 days after her disappearance, Teresa's wallet was found at a Fort Lauderdale library on August 11, 1975, but there was no sign of Teresa herself. Her car, a gray-green four-door 1964 or 1966 Nash Rambler with a license plate number 10 to 16,425, has never been recovered, and authorities have had no further leads regarding its location or Teresa's whereabouts. There is speculation that Teresa may have traveled to Tennessee, Colorado, or Pennsylvania after leaving Florida, but no concrete evidence supports this theory. At the time of her disappearance, Teresa was a senior at Stranahan High School, working as a server at a local beachfront hotel. She had dreams of becoming an oceanographer or an artist. According to her mother, Teresa had been behaving normally in the days leading up to her disappearance, and there was no indication that anything was amiss. Both of Teresa's parents are still alive and continue to hold out hope for answers in her case. A memorial bench dedicated to her can be found at the Lauderdale Memorial Park Cemetery, where she will be buried if her body is ever recovered. Authorities suspect foul play may have been involved in her disappearance, and her case is now being investigated as a potential homicide. Despite decades of searching, there has been no sign of Teresa since that summer day in 1975, and her case remains unsolved. The Fort Lauderdale Police Department continues to investigate the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Keith Fleming was last seen on April 28, 1977, while on his way home from his girlfriend's house in Cocoa Beach, Florida. His parents had dropped him off there after school, and he was supposed to return home for dinner. After spending time with his girlfriend, Keith left her residence, and the two of them rode her bicycle to the end of Osceola Street at State Road A1A. Keith then got off the bike and told his girlfriend he was going to hitchhike the rest of the way home, a practice that was common for residents of Cocoa Beach at the time. When his girlfriend's mother learned that Keith intended to hitchhike, she went back out to pick him up and give him a ride home herself. However, by the time she arrived at the spot where her daughter had left Keith, he was already gone. He never arrived at home and has never been seen or heard from again. John Rodney McCrae is considered the prime and only suspect in Keith's case. McCrae had a troubled history, having murdered an 8-year-old boy in Michigan in the 1950s when he was just 16 years old. He served 20 years in prison for that crime. From 1976 to 1980, McCrae worked as a guard at the Brevard Correctional Institution in Florida, which houses mostly teenage inmates. During McCrae's time at the prison, 3 local boys disappeared, including 20-year-old Charles Collingwood, an inmate who escaped shortly after allegations of an inappropriate relationship with McCrae surfaced. McCrae is also considered a suspect in the 1979 disappearance of 12-year-old Kipling Hess, who was an acquaintance of his. Neither Hess nor Collingwood was ever found. Police believe Keith's disappearance fits the profile of McCrae's previous crimes, as McCrae himself admitted that he liked to watch young boys at Cocoa Beach, a location where Keith frequently surfed. McCrae's criminal history didn't end there. He was convicted in 1987 for the murder of 14-year-old Randy Ray Lawfer, but his conviction was overturned on appeal. However, in May 2005, McCrae was convicted again and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. By then, McCrae was 70 years old and wheelchair-bound. He was found dead in his cell just 2 weeks later, having succumbed to intestinal ulcers and gastrointestinal bleeding. Despite his death, investigators remain strongly convinced that McCrae was responsible for more murders than he was ever convicted of, including those of Keith Fleming, Kipling Hess, and Charles Collingwood. McCrae was offered immunity from prosecution in exchange for revealing the locations of the boys' bodies, but he always maintained his innocence. His wife, however, later stated that McCrae had confessed to her that he had murdered Hess and Collingwood. At the time of his disappearance, Keith Fleming was a young boy who enjoyed rock music, biking, and surfing, and he frequented the Cocoa Beach Pier. He was the youngest of 3 sons and attended Roosevelt Middle School. He was also attending counseling at Alternatives, a drug therapy center, after his parents had caught him with marijuana. Keith's mother and brothers still live in the Cocoa Beach area and continue to search for him, though his father has since passed away. Some have criticized the investigation into Keith's disappearance, suggesting that the police relax in following up on leads and conducted only a perfunctory search for him. In fact, the girl who was the last person to see Keith was interviewed only once in 1993. Keith Fleming's case remains unsolved, and his family still holds hope for answers, even though many years have passed since he went missing. Linda Flutterman was last seen early on the morning of August 17th 1996, at the Myakka City Bar and Grill in Myakka, Florida. Later that evening, at around 6 p.m., the body of her boyfriend of 8 years, Jefferson Lowry Blanton, was discovered at the home they shared on 6B Road in the 37,000 block. He had been shot to death, though the murder weapon was never found. There were no signs of a struggle inside the residence. The doors were locked, and nothing appeared to be missing. Both Flutterman and Blanton's pickup trucks were parked nearby, but Flutterman herself was nowhere to be found. She has never been heard from again. Before her disappearance, Flutterman had left her 4-year-old son with her sister, which further deepened the mystery. For years, Flutterman was the primary suspect in Blanton's murder, and authorities considered her a fugitive. Although the police attempted to obtain a warrant for her arrest on charges of murder, they were unable to gather enough evidence. Instead, they were able to secure a warrant for her arrest on the charge of deserting her child. Flutterman and Blanton had a history of domestic issues, with police being called to their home on multiple occasions to address disturbances. Both of them struggled with alcohol, and there was a history of violent altercations between the couple. On one occasion, Flutterman allegedly shot out the tires of Blanton's truck during an argument. Blanton had been arrested for assaulting Flutterman in the past, but formal charges were never filed. In 1993, Flutterman obtained a restraining order against Blanton, claiming he had threatened her, though the couple eventually reconciled, and the restraining order was dismissed. For years, Flutterman was believed to be either a fugitive or involved in Blanton's murder, but investigators are now revisiting the case with a different perspective. They are exploring the theory that Flutterman may have been innocent of Blanton's murder and that she herself may have met with foul play. At the time of her disappearance, she had a stable job as a technician at L3 Aviation Recorders and was known to be a good mother. Her family and loved ones insist that it was completely uncharacteristic of her to abandon her son or go out of touch with them. In response to their concerns, the police went to the couple's home and discovered Blanton's body. Flutterman's family insists she would never have left her child behind. One possible lead in the case involves Larry James Parks, who was at the same bar as Flutterman and Blanton on the night of August 17th. In 2002, Parks pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder in connection with a 1999 triple homicide, in which he killed a woman and her 2 young daughters. A fingerprint belonging to Parks was found inside Flutterman's pickup truck, prompting authorities to investigate him as a potential suspect in both Blanton's murder and Flutterman's disappearance. However, as of now, no charges have been filed against Parks in connection with the case. Flutterman was declared legally dead by her family in 2001, though her case remains unsolved. While she is still considered a possible suspect in Blanton's murder, many believe she may have been a victim herself, caught up in a tragic situation. Christine Flahive told her family that she planned to spend the day of January 5, 1995, in downtown Punta Gorda, Florida, paying bills. She was last seen later that evening in the parking lot of the U-Save grocery store. Flahive's father later discovered that she might have been inside JD's lounge during the night, a bar she frequented as a regular. After that, she was never heard from again. Despite an extensive investigation, little evidence was found to explain her whereabouts. Authorities suspect foul play was involved in her disappearance, and they believe that she was likely killed by someone she knew. Investigators theorize that the person or persons responsible for her disappearance still reside in the local area, given that Christine frequently visited bars and restaurants in Punta Gorda. They believe that whoever is responsible for her death may have also been a regular at these same establishments, potentially leaving behind a clue to their identity. Philip Barr has been considered a possible suspect in Christine's case. In 2015, Barr was convicted of the 2001 murder of a 19-year-old woman from Punta Gorda and sentenced to life in prison. In 2019, authorities conducted a search of a 12-acre area near Barr's former home in an effort to find Christine's body, but no remains were found. Although Barr is not formally charged in Flahive's case, he remains a person of interest. Another possible suspect is Jonathan Charles Payne, a man who was also a regular at the bars and restaurants that Christine visited, including JD's Lounge. Payne died of natural causes in 2011 at the age of 49. A photo of him is also included in the case summary. Investigators believe that Payne lived on Rollins Street in 1995 and worked in the construction industry at the time of Christine's disappearance. There is speculation that Payne may have used heavy construction equipment to dispose of Flahive's body, though no conclusive evidence has emerged to confirm this theory. At the time of her disappearance, Christine worked as a cocktail waitress. She was involved in the biker culture and was reportedly known to abuse drugs and alcohol, which could have placed her at risk. Despite years of investigation and several persons of interest, Christine Flahive's case remains unsolved. Lynn Friend was last seen on August 28, 1994, in Hallandale Beach, Florida, during a phone conversation with her fiancé. At 8:15 p.m., she told him that her ex-husband, Clifford Brett Friend, had stopped by her home and wanted her to accompany him to Pembroke Pines, which was about a 10-minute drive away, to pick up his child support check. That was the last time anyone heard from her. At around 10 p.m., a witness saw a man park Lynn's blue 1989 Mercury Grand Marquis next to a field at Northeast 26th Avenue and 207th Street in Northeast Miami-Dade County. The man then got into a black SUV, similar to a 1992 Ford Explorer that Clifford owned, and drove away. Several days later, police recovered Lynn's car at the same location, noting that the right front tire had been punctured, as if it had been stabbed with a knife. Then, at 11:30 p.m., U.S. Coast Guard officials observed Clifford and a friend, Alan M. Gold, throwing a large suitcase and a smaller object overboard from Clifford's motorboat into the Atlantic Ocean, about 3 miles offshore from Miami Beach. There was a violent storm in the area at the time, and when the Coast Guard patrol boat approached with its lights off and illuminated the men with spotlights, Clifford attempted to flee, leading the authorities on a chase before being detained. Both Clifford and Gold were charged with illegal dumping at sea after they were questioned separately and refused to disclose what had been thrown overboard. Law enforcement later seized Clifford's boat, discovering light-gauge rope and 2 cement blocks inside. Despite an extensive search for Lynn's body, no evidence was found. 6 days before her disappearance, Lynn had won full custody of her 5-year-old son, and she was planning to move with him to Nashville, Tennessee, to be with her fiancé, a wealthy businessman. However, Clifford had fought to stop her move. The couple's 3-year marriage had ended amicably, and they initially shared joint custody of their son. But the custody battle had turned bitter when Lynn decided to relocate. Her family expressed concern for her safety during this period, and Clifford was reportedly devastated after she was awarded full custody. After Lynn's disappearance, Clifford took custody of their son, refused to let Lynn's parents see him, and remarried in 1995. Clifford remained a suspect throughout the investigation, and in March 2012, he was charged with Lynn's murder. Alan M. Gold, who had been with Clifford during the disposal of the items at sea, was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against Clifford. After a 2-week trial in November 2014, Clifford was convicted of second-degree murder. Due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance, foul play was suspected in Lynn's case. Mary Frederick was last seen at her residence in the Seminole Heights neighborhood of Tampa, Florida, at approximately 9:30 p.m. on June 3, 1994. After her disappearance, her home was found locked, with the outside lights still on, and her school textbooks left neatly on the table. However, some personal items were missing, including her purse and a gun, while her burgundy Pontiac Subaru station wagon was left behind. At the time, Frederick's husband and young son were away camping in the western United States, and there was no indication that she had planned to leave. Upon further investigation, there was no sign of a struggle or foul play within the house, and no activity was recorded on her credit cards or any withdrawals made from her bank account since June 1994, which further fueled concerns. Frederick had been last seen in the company of Louis Joseph Lava III, a 40-year-old co-worker at the time of her disappearance. Lava was located and interviewed by police after Frederick went missing, but he offered no substantial information regarding her whereabouts or what might have happened to her. At the time of her disappearance, Frederick worked as a child advocate for the Florida Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services and had taken a leave of absence to pursue a law degree at Stetson University. She was passionate about her work at DHRS and had big aspirations of becoming a lawyer. Frederick was close to her family and maintained regular contact with them, making it highly uncharacteristic for her to leave without informing anyone or abandon her young son. Given the circumstances, foul play is suspected, as there is no evidence to suggest that she left voluntarily. To this day, her case remains unsolved. Jason Gail House was last seen in the early morning hours of December 20th, 2003, when he went to the gay nightclub 2606 in the 2600 block of Armenia Avenue in Tampa, Florida, with his roommate. Gail House, a regular at the club, told his roommate between 2:45 and 3 a.m. that he was leaving with two white males he had just met. However, his roommate did not see the individuals Gail House left with, and he has never been heard from again. Gail House's disappearance is believed to be connected to the murder of Michael Wayne Wachholtz, who went missing the day after Gail House, and may also be linked to the disappearances of other gay men from the Tampa and Fort Lauderdale areas, including David Rhodes, Barry Block, Mark Jackson, Mark Thompson, James Shoemaker, and Bradley Williams. All these men were in roughly the same age group, were gay, and lived in or around the same area. Rhodes and Block were the first to disappear in 1988 from the same apartment building in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. In 1995, James Shoemaker vanished from Tampa, and in 2001, both Mark Thompson and Bradley Williams disappeared, the former's truck later found abandoned in Tampa. Wachholtz's body was found in mid-January 2004, about a month after Gail House's disappearance. His body was discovered wrapped in a sheet and stuffed in the back of his 1992 Jeep Cherokee SUV, parked at a town and country restaurant in Tampa. Although Gail House and Wachholtz didn't know each other, both were members of the same online dating and chat services and frequented gay bars and clubs in the Tampa area. The other men who disappeared are still missing. Stephen Lorenzo is one of the prime suspects in both Gail House and Wachholtz's deaths. He lived across the street from Drake Towers, the apartment building where Rhodes, Block, and Jackson had lived and vanished from. In May 2004, an affidavit was filed in the United States District Court of Tampa that accused Lorenzo of drugging both Gail House and Wachholtz, sexually abusing them, and causing their deaths. Scott Paul Schweikert, Lorenzo's accomplice, was also implicated as an accessory after the fact. Lorenzo was convicted of 10 GHB-related charges in 2006 and sentenced to 200 years in federal prison. Schweikert was sentenced to 40 years for his involvement in the crimes. In September 2012, Schweikert was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Gail House and Wachholtz. The indictment accused him of aiding, abetting, and encouraging the men's homicides. In June 2016, Schweikert pleaded guilty to both murders and was sentenced to life in prison on top of the 40 years he was already serving for GHB-related charges. He admitted that he and Lorenzo had conspired to target single gay men, turn them into sex slaves, and either kill them or sell them once they had grown tired of them. Schweikert explained that he and Lorenzo met Gail House at the 2606 nightclub, convinced him to go to Lorenzo's house for sex, and then killed him. Afterward, they disposed of his body parts in trash bins around the city. Gail House blood was found on Lorenzo's garage floor, which corroborated Schweikert's story about the death. The next night, Schweikert and Lorenzo met Wachholtz at the same club, drugged him with GHB, and killed him as well. As part of his plea agreement, Schweikert agreed to testify against Lorenzo, but Lorenzo has not been formally charged with the murders and remains in prison for the GHB-related charges. Gail House, who had recently moved from Sarasota to Tampa just 4 months before his disappearance, was studying interior design at Hillsborough Community College and working as a flower arranger at a florist shop. He is described as a hard-working, dedicated young man, and foul play is suspected in his case due to the disturbing circumstances surrounding his disappearance and death. Patricia Gifford was last seen at the Banana Boat Lounge on State Road 84 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on January 1st, 1982. She had gone there to celebrate the holiday with a female friend. While at the lounge, she encountered Dennis Michael Socker and his brother Gary for the first time. Witnesses reported that Dennis persistently tried to buy Gifford drinks throughout the night, but he was unsuccessful. Around 2 a.m., Gifford's friend became ill and was assisted to her car by Gifford and the Socker brothers. After falling asleep, she awoke at 5:30 a.m. to find Gifford missing. The last confirmed sighting of her was when she paid her bar bill at 1:30 a.m. Some patrons at the Banana Boat captured photographs of the New Year's celebration that evening, which included images of Gifford and the Socker brothers. Authorities used these photos to identify the individuals involved. Dennis had a criminal history involving sex crimes. In 1980, he had abducted and repeatedly raped a 19-year-old woman after she rejected his advances. He received a 1-year prison sentence but was released after just 5 months. On January 5th, for days after Gifford's disappearance and shortly after his image appeared on television, Dennis fled South Florida, catching a flight to Michigan. Initially, Gary claimed that he and Dennis had separated at 2 a.m. and that he had no information regarding Gifford's whereabouts. However, he later altered his account, alleging that he witnessed Dennis rape and murder Gifford after she spurned his advances. According to Gary, Gifford had agreed to go to breakfast with them, but en route, Dennis stopped at a secluded area where he raped and strangled her. Gary claimed he wanted to intervene, but felt too intimidated by his brother, whom he described as having the devil in his eyes. He eventually recanted this statement. The 1981 Datsun pickup truck that Dennis drove the night Gifford disappeared, which had been provided by his employer, was located in Tampa, Florida, on January 22nd. The interior was found to be bloodstained. Dennis remained missing until May 1986, when he was arrested in Georgia for driving under the influence. During questioning about Gifford's disappearance, he confessed to raping a woman in Michigan in 1979 and admitted to having raped and strangled Gifford. He was charged with murder and extradited to Florida. In 1987, Dennis was convicted of Gifford's kidnapping, rape, and murder, receiving the death penalty, despite his defense arguing that Gifford had not been held against her will and that her murder was not premeditated. He currently resides on death row in Florida, awaiting execution. To this day, Gifford's body has not been located, and Dennis claims to have no recollection of where he left it. Rose Gayart was last seen in Cape Coral, Florida, on March 21, 1985. She had previously lived in Dansville, New York, until 1984, when she and her boyfriend, Bob Paddock, moved to Florida with a trailer. They settled in the 50 block of Northeast Barron Way in Fort Myers, where they lived with Bob's mother, Dorothy Rittenhouse. Gayart had been in regular contact with her family, both through phone calls and letters. In these communications, she mentioned her strained relationship with Rittenhouse, frequently mentioning their disagreements and the tension that existed between them. Her last letter, sent to her sister on March 4th, thanked her for a birthday card and expressed a desire for her sister and brother-in-law to visit her in Florida. Tensions between Gayart and those she was living with escalated. On the night of March 14th, a neighbor overheard an argument coming from Gayhart's residence, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Gayart, visibly upset, went to the neighbor's house to use the phone. She told the neighbor that she was pregnant and that both Paddock and Rittenhouse wanted her to have an abortion, as they didn't believe the child was Paddock's. Gayart also said Rittenhouse had told her to leave and never come back. She left the trailer with a suitcase in tow, visibly distressed. In the aftermath of this argument, Paddock rented an apartment for himself. Rittenhouse later claimed that she bought Gayart a bus ticket to return to New York. She went to a local bar to give it to her, but Gayart refused to accept the ticket. The two argued, and Rittenhouse later wrote a letter to Gayhart's mother in New York, enclosing a copy of the bus ticket, which was dated March 17th but lacked Gayhart's signature. In her letter, Rittenhouse made disturbing claims about Gayhart's life. She wrote that Gayart was pregnant, and that both she and Paddock wanted her to have an abortion because they didn't believe the child was Paddock's. Rittenhouse also mentioned that Gayart was involved with drugs and alcohol and that she had left with 3 men in a red pickup truck. Rittenhouse ended the letter with a chilling statement: "I'm not responsible for whatever happens." It remains unclear whether Gayart was pregnant at the time, as she never mentioned it in her letters to her family. Gayhart's last known activity before her disappearance occurred on March 19th, when she went to the Big Howie's Hot Dogs Diner on Southeast 47th Terrace in Cape Coral. She asked for a job and was hired immediately. On her job application, she listed Paddock's new apartment as her address and confided in her employer that she and Paddock were not getting along. Gayart walked back and forth to work over the next few days, and on the night of March 21st, she finished her shift and got into a red pickup truck driven by an unidentified man. Her employer saw her leave, assumed she had a ride home, and thought nothing more of it. Gayart never returned to pick up her paycheck, and she has not been heard from since. When questioned about her disappearance, Paddock told authorities that he had last seen Gayart sometime in the middle of March and that she occasionally stayed with him at his new apartment but did not actually live there. He claimed that Gayart had left behind a paper sack of clothes and a file box containing a scrapbook filled with important documents and memories. This scrapbook was especially meaningful to Gayart, as it contained mementos of her firstborn child, who had died at 6 months old, and her second child, whom she had placed for adoption. Her family finds it hard to believe she would have left such an important item behind. Soon after Gayhart's disappearance, Paddock and Rittenhouse returned to New York. Paddock has remained in contact with Gayhart's family, and at one point, he confided in his sister that he believed his mother, who is now deceased, was responsible for Gayhart's disappearance. Foul play is suspected in Gayhart's case, and there has been no sign of her since March 1985. Authorities in New York are still investigating the case, but as of now, her whereabouts remain unknown. Kenneth Go was last seen in Bradenton, Florida, on June 26, 1975, after traveling there from his family's home in Comac, New York, to visit an uncle. At the time, he was living with a couple of young male roommates in Bradenton, and he was driving a green Carmen Ghia. He has never been heard from again. Gautier's family is perplexed by his disappearance, as there was no apparent reason why he would have chosen to walk out of his life. Just before he vanished, he had spoken with his mother on the phone, and their conversation was entirely normal. He had expressed interest in going on a tour of the western U.S., and for a time his family believed he might have simply left for that trip. However, after months and then years passed without hearing from him, they began to reconsider that theory. Gautier's roommates in Bradenton stated that they had no idea what happened to him, and no one close to him could understand why he would disappear without a trace. The mystery deepened in April 1981, when Gautier's parents received a collect call from someone claiming to be Lee Gautier, the name his family called him. The call came at 4:30 p.m., and his mother accepted the charges, but before they could speak, the caller abruptly hung up. The call was traced to a pay phone in Daytona Beach, Florida, but when Gautier's family tried to follow up, the trail went cold. A second call came about a month later, again from someone claiming to be Lee Gautier, but once again, the caller hung up before they could connect. This second call was traced to the cell block at the Orange County Jail in Orlando, Florida. However, there were no inmates named Lee Gautier or Kenneth Go in the jail at that time, and the staff could not determine who had placed the call. In response, Gautier's brother traveled to Florida in an attempt to find him. He searched among Daytona Beach's transient population, posted flyers, and asked people to look out for Kenneth. During this search, a witness came forward, claiming to have seen a man who resembled Gautier playing pool in a local bar. The man was described as having missing fingers on his right hand, which matched Gautier's appearance. However, despite these leads, Gautier's brother's search ultimately proved fruitless, and the person or persons responsible for the mysterious phone calls have never been identified. Gautier's case remains unsolved to this day, with no confirmed trace of him since his disappearance in 1975. The circumstances surrounding his case are still a mystery. Scott Gamble was last seen on September 23, 2007, when he left Miami Beach, Florida, with his half-brother Jake Branham, Jake's wife Kelly, a friend named Samuel Carey, and two others, Kirby Logan Archer and Guillermo Alfonso Zaraboso. The group set off in Jake's 47-foot fishing vessel, the Joe Cool, with plans to take Archer and Zaraboso to the Bahamas to meet their girlfriends and then return to Miami the following day. Archer and Zaraboso had paid the group $4,000 for the trip. However, on September 24th, Jake's uncle contacted authorities after the group failed to return as scheduled, noting that they were expected back by noon, but had not yet arrived by 4 o'clock or 5 p.m. Investigators discovered that the Joe Cool had already been located adrift in the Straits of Florida, around 20 miles from Cuba and almost 160 miles off course. The boat was found at 6 p.m. on September 23rd, in disarray with no occupants aboard. The life rafts were missing, and it appeared the crew had abandoned the vessel in haste. A search was launched for the missing crew members. On September 27th, Zaraboso and Archer were found in a life raft not far from where the Joe Cool had been located. They were rescued and questioned by authorities. Zaraboso was later charged with making false statements to a federal agent. Further investigation revealed that Archer had a warrant for his arrest in connection to a $92,000 theft from a Walmart in Arkansas. The investigation into the disappearance of Gamble, Jake, Kelly, and Carey grew more suspicious as Archer and Zaraboso gave conflicting statements about what had happened on the boat. They could not agree on how or when they met each other or what had occurred on the Joe Cool. Additionally, neither could provide any information about the girlfriends they had planned to meet in the Bahamas. Zaraboso initially told investigators that the boat had been hijacked by 3 armed men who shot the others aboard, and that he had thrown their bodies overboard. However, evidence on the boat contradicted his story. For spent 9mm bullet casings were found aboard the vessel, 3 of which were from inside the cabin, not outside as Zaraboso had claimed. Furthermore, a blowgun with darts, knives, cellular phones, and 2 pairs of leather gloves without fingers were found in a backpack on the life raft with Zaraboso and Archer, raising further suspicions. Zaraboso later changed his story, claiming that Archer had been the one to commit the shootings. In July 2008, Archer changed his plea to guilty after maintaining his innocence for nearly a year. In exchange for his guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty, and Archer was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Archer admitted to killing 2 people on the boat, and he claimed Zaraboso had killed the other 2. In February 2009, Zaraboso was convicted on 16 charges, including 4 counts of murder, and was sentenced to 5 life sentences plus 85 years. He continues to maintain his innocence, stating that Archer was the one who committed the murders and that Archer had threatened to kill him too if he revealed the truth. An extensive search of the ocean did not recover any of the victims' bodies. Given the circumstances of the case and the conflicting statements from the suspects, foul play is suspected in the disappearances and presumed murders of Kelly, Jake, Gamble, and Carey. Their cases remain unsolved, though the convictions of Archer and Zaraboso provide some closure to the investigation.